Hello everyone. My name is Elise. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. I'm very excited to do my February wrap up because February was a bangin' month for me. I loved the majority of the books that I read this month. So it was fantastic. I had a great time and I'm so excited to talk about these books in depth with you. I'm going to be going over 8 books today. And yeah, I can't wait. So as always, we're gonna be talking about them in the order that I read them. And yeah, let's go ahead and get into these amazing books. The first book that I read this month was actually a library book, and that is a Girlhood. And I think the subtitle to this is A Letter to My Transgender Daughter. And this is by Carolyn Hayes, but that is a pseudonym, so it's not the author's actual name. But this was an interesting one to start off the month with. So this is nonfiction, obviously, and I should say this is published by Blair. This one is one of the few books that I looked up reviews before talking to you about it. So typically I don't look at any reviews for books until after I've filmed my wrap up and my reaction to them, because I don't want to be influenced by other people's reviews. I just want to give like my honest initial take of them, and then I will go and look at reviews after I've already filmed it. But this is one of the situations where I felt like I needed to look up some other reviews, specifically from people who identified as transgender, because multiple points throughout the book, things were just hitting me weird. And I was trying to like process through why things were feeling weird for me and like why it was coming up for me. But yeah, so I'll say overall, there were things that I really enjoyed about the book and then things that I did not like about the book. And I think some of the things that I loved are, it's clear that this mother has an extreme amount of love for her child, for all of her children, and that she has like a very good relationship with her husband, and they're trying to sort of like do the best job that they can to be advocates for their daughter. And this all culminates around an experience in which they are living in a kind of like southern state. I don't remember where. I think they're living in Texas. And they have one of their neighbors make a CPS call about them because their daughter is transgender. And the person that makes the CPS call is, reporting that they're sort of like forcing this upon their child, when it's very clear that the child wants this for herself. And like really just their child identifies as a woman. So that's that. And this CPS call kind of like shakes all of them, and they feel very unsafe. They're worried about, their daughter being taken away from them and their daughter's rights. So that is kind of like the premise that starts the trajectory of a lot of the book, and that's what it says in the blurb. So the things that were hitting me strangely is there kept being portions where it seemed like the mom was trying to talk on behalf of transgender people, and the book is obviously written to her daughter, like directly to her daughter. So it's all written as like you, like I want this for you, and like you as the reader are sort of getting to experience that. But it felt very much like, let me tell you about your own experience in certain areas of the book that just didn't sit well for me. And I can sort of understand maybe where this mom is coming from, and I understand that like being the mother of a transgender daughter is its own experience that should, be out there to read about. I don't know if this is necessarily for every person who is transgender. I think some parts might hit poorly, and yeah, some things it felt like, okay, you're sort of speaking for a community that you're not a part of, and some parts felt like a little uncomfy around like trying to make excuses for themselves of like why they made certain decisions. Yeah, there were just parts like that that felt a little bit off to me. That's not to say that there weren't great parts in it. I'm not upset that I read it, but I would just say like caution to people who don't want to read those things like at all. So yeah, and that's sort of what I saw as I was looking up reviews from people who are transgender, that they felt like this might not be a book for all people within the community, and that there were maybe some like more problematic pieces to this. But yeah, again, it's an experience of a mother, so you know, maybe for other parents this might be a great thing to read. But yeah, I think if there's elements of that sound interesting and you can also deal with like being uncomfortable with some of the pieces, then definitely go ahead and pick it up. Again, there were some good elements. Information for me that I think was new. There's some information about like, you know, the CPS system and how that works, especially in the South. So I found that very informative. Yeah, so mixed feelings on this overall. That was a really long review, but it's because I had mixed feelings about it. Next up, we get into a string of frickin' bangers, okay? They were so good. I read so many books that I loved in quick succession. And that all started off with The Wall. So this is by Marlon Haushofer, and this is translated from the German by Shaun Whiteside and published by New Directions. So I read this for a new video series that I was doing called 2 Books, 1 Title, where I read 2 books with the same title and talk about the title integration as well as like give an overall review. So I will link that video down below if you want more in-depth discussion about this. But this was so good. This is about a woman who one evening finds out that there has all of a sudden been an invisible wall that has erected and isolated her in this Austrian mountain village, and she's secluded to a hunting lodge. No one else is inside this barrier with her that the wall has erected itself, and nobody knows kind of like why the wall's there, what happened. So it's about her trying to survive by herself, trapped in this, you know, little area. This is a very feminist novel. It has lots to say about social constructs that keep women from being who they want to be, that keep women from their full potential. And then it also talks about sort of the ways that you can find freedom when those are no longer in place. And even though she is stuck physically, she has a lot of freedom in her life now to be who she wants to be. Yeah, I think this also has a lot to say about motherhood and people who maybe don't want to be mothers but feel forced into motherhood. And yeah, this just does so many things so well. I loved it. I could gush about it all day. It has beautiful nature writing in it. And while I would say this isn't like a fast-paced book, I was so entranced the entire time. I didn't want to put it down. So yeah, I absolutely loved this. Highly recommend you pick this up. And that is The Wall. Now, next up, I read another dystopian, and that is Severance by Ling Ma. I also loved this book. This one is published by FSG. And this one is very popular. It's about a pandemic. This was written pre-pandemic, but it is about a pandemic that is eerily similar to COVID. You're sort of seeing her before, during, and after the pandemic initially hits. And it's very much like a workplace novel in some regards. So she works for kind of a large company that does production for a lot of other companies, specifically around books, it feels like. So there's like an art department that works on art books. She works in the Bible department. And yeah, it's about what it means to be in a capitalistic society, that really doesn't care about you. It's very interesting. I like that it flitted back and forth between past, present, and future, and it was very easy to follow even though it did that. It has a lot to say about love and what keeps us from fully giving ourselves to another human being. And then this book has a plot that goes off the fucking rails. Okay, so the future timeline was batshit crazy. I was not expecting that at all, but this one, yeah, had a crazy plot in that future timeline particularly, and it was just highly enjoyable. The narrator was sort of just slightly off kilter in a way that was very intriguing to read. And yeah, you follow her experience being in a pandemic and starting to work from home and all that type of stuff that we have gone through. So highly recommend this. Very much enjoyed. Add to the voices that say it's fantastic because it is. So that is Severance by Ling Ma. I will also say I watched the show Severance. They're not related in any way. No relation. They're totally different. So don't think you need to read this before watching it or anything like that. Totally different things. All right, next up, we have the other book for that 2 books, 1 title video. And again, that's The Wall. And this one is by John Lanchester. This is published by Norton. And I did not know at the time of reading this, or even at the time that I was filming that video, that this was nominated for the Booker Prize the year that it came out, which makes sense now in retrospect, but I wouldn't have thought that going in. But this is another dystopian. So I read 3 dystopians in a row. I also loved this one, so I loved all 3 of them. And yeah, it was just like a fun little dystopian moment in my life, and it was highly enjoyable. But this one follows a society that has been ravaged by climate change. This sort of takes place in what is meant to be the UK in the future, but it's no longer called that. And they live on an island. This main character is what do you call him? A guardian or something? This main character is a defender, and basically you have a mandatory 2 years of service in the military, and that involves being a defender on the wall. So the island is surrounded by this wall that's, very tall, very wide, and you are charged as a defender to protect your portion of the wall at all costs. It's freezing fucking cold on the wall, and there's lots of themes around coldness throughout here. And the rule is that if you let any of the others, which is just anyone who lives outside the boundaries of the wall, if you let any of the others infiltrate the wall, someone on your section will be sent out beyond the wall to take their place. So it's sort of like a 1 in, 1 out type of situation, and that's supposed to incentivize you to not let people in. So those are sort of the initial setup or premise of the book. And yeah, you follow this new defender who is brand new to the wall, and you see them go through some training and just the difficulty of having 12-hour shifts where it's highly monotonous, but also like any little thing can set you on edge. So it's very emotional, roller coaster like. This also has a plot that goes a little bit off the rails, and I highly enjoyed it. This has a lot to say on xenophobia. I wonder, I thought this after when I was like, oh, it's a Booker Prize book, that depending on when this was published, this might have been a response to Brexit. I could totally see this being a response to that because again, it does have a lot to do with xenophobia and sort of like keeping other people out. And yeah, I think it's brilliant for that piece as well as just being like really good writing. So that is The Wall. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to trim down these reviews because I'm talking about them way too long. So next up we have a poetry collection, and that is Content Warning Everything by Akwaeke Emezi. This is published by Copper Canyon Press, which is a small press in Washington where I live that only publishes poetry. And this was also fantastic. This is very short. It's only 45 pages. I think it was the shortest poetry collection I had on my poetry TBR. This is a collection that pulls a lot from Christianity or like, you know, Protestant religions in general and twists them in a very unique way. I very much enjoyed that kind of religious commentary aspect of it. And yeah, I think these poems were just stunning. Some of them are pretty short like this. And then there are a few that take up more than one page, but some of the titles like we have here is, What If Jesus Was My Big Brother? What If My Mother Met Mary? And things like that. So these are very graphic, like the title is apt that this has a lot of content warnings in it. Again, very graphic, not just depicting violence, but emotional abuse and lots of different things going on here. So know that going in. But I do think that this is a pretty decent collection for a beginner. There's not too much like hidden subtext to these poems. So I think if you're a beginner and wanting to pick up a collection, this is a good option for you, as long as you can handle the content warnings and have maybe some base level knowledge about the Bible, like the big players in Christianity. But yeah, I think this was overall fantastic and dark, but like hauntingly beautiful in a lot of regards, and very much has themes of like familial connection and ancestry. So yeah, I very much enjoyed this and would recommend as well. Then we go over to a short story collection, and that is Elemental. This is an anthology collection by Two Lines Press. This is part of their Calico editions, which are these anthologies. And this one sort of centers around the elements. So each story features some type of natural element in some way. I overall enjoyed this, but I didn't enjoy it as much as That We May Live, which is the other Calico edition that I've read, and that's on Chinese speculative short stories. But a lot of these were haunting and talked about the natural world, which I very much enjoyed that element. It has stuff to say about the climate crisis and how we need to be like good protectors of the earth. There's a lot to do with the spirit realm in some of these stories. One of the first stories is about these like precious stones. The title might even be Precious Stones. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, that sort of has to do with lineage and the spirit realm and how that is linked into the natural world. But yeah, like I said, this was sort of a mixed bag for me. Some I liked, some I didn't, but overall would still recommend, especially if you're into quieter stories about the natural world. This was a much more quiet collection than the other one. So that is Elemental. And this is, again, an anthology. So written by many different authors, translated by many different translators. Everything in here is translated and from like many different languages. So that is Elemental. Next up we have Milk Fed by Melissa Broder, and this is published by Scribner. This was the last book on my 5-star predictions from last year that I needed to read in order to finish. So I will be coming out with a video this month to kind of wrap up what I actually thought of all of my 5-star predictions. But I will tell you, this I freaking loved, and it was 5 stars, baby. This is about a woman who is very much in the grips of an eating disorder, and she meets this woman at a yogurt store that she frequents who is living in a larger body and totally okay with that. And this is sort of revolutionary to the main character. What's her name? Rachel. Yeah, she sort of becomes increasingly obsessed with this person. There's also definitely like a lot of sexual tension between the two of them. I've heard other people describe this as like the most bisexual book ever, and I sort of agree with that. This is a super bisexual book in the best way, and I definitely enjoyed that element to it. There are a lot of like sensual parts. There's a lot of conversation about sex. Sometimes it's not always sexy, if that makes sense. Lots of conversations about bodies and sex in here and what it means to be queer. Both of them are also Jewish, so there's a lot about the Jewish community, and this was very enjoyable to read. I think it's pretty plotty, like there was a lot going on, and Rachel is sort of exploring this new relationship. She also flits back and forth between Rachel being in therapy sessions, trying to talk about her toxic relationship with her mother, which anytime we talk about disordered eating, I appreciate when people talk about kind of like a mother-daughter dynamic, because that is really frequently how some of like the pervasiveness of diet culture and restriction and disordered eating can be passed down through generations. I think this has so many good things to say about what it means to be struggling with an eating disorder, what recovery can look like. And yeah, so many things in here were majorly relatable, and it was just nice to be able to hear about an experience that sort of articulates some of the things that you have gone through, but in another person's voice. Everything about this was good. It was funny, it was dark, it was sexy, it was plotty, it was well written, and it had themes that I really enjoy, and I think it was done in a nuanced and realistic way. So that is Milk Fed. I absolutely loved it. I'll talk more about this in my 5-star predictions wrap-up video, but that is this one. And then the last book I read in the month of, what were we in? February, is Foster by Claire Keegan. And this is published by Grove Press. This is a very short novella. I think maybe originally was like a short story that got published on its own after the success of her other book. So this one I did not enjoy as much as Small Things Like These, and even Small Things Like These, it didn't blow me out of the water like it did other people, and this one I liked even slightly less. Her stories are very moralistic, and I like that to a certain extent, but not in the package that it's being delivered with Claire Keegan stories. And it really is that it's just like too moralistic and too saccharine is the word that's coming to mind for me. I like a moralistic tale, like I like a tale that's trying to prove a point, but I tend to like that if it's dark. And this is just a little bit too bedtime story for me. It is about a family who is very poor that gives up one of their kids to another local family because the daughter's mother is now pregnant again, and they just don't have the money to be able to like feed and clothe and whatever else for all of their kids. So you follow this daughter who goes to this new family who is incredibly loving and very much wants to have her, and what that experience is like of what it means to love someone who is not necessarily, you know, your blood, power of loss and grief. And I love all of those themes, and I enjoyed the writing style. It was just a little bit too light for me. I would have liked a little more grit. That's just totally personal preference. So if that sounds interesting to you, please pick this up. The writing is great and it's very short. So that is Foster by Claire Keegan, and that one is published by Grove. Those are the 8 books that I read in February. Thank you for sticking around. I know I waxed lyrical about some of these for a long time. So if you have read any of these, please let me know what you thought, and let me know your favorite book that you read in February so I can try and put it on a TBR. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Bye.